Hello, and welcome to our webinar, an overview of the WAIS-5 clinical psychometric and structural changes. I'm Erin Gunnelson, Senior Product Manager. Our presenter today is Dr. Gail Roden. Dr. Roden is a clinical neuropsychologist who majored in psychology as an undergraduate at Yale University and completed her PhD in clinical psychology at New York University. In 1994, she opened the Center for Attention, Learning, and Memory in Raleigh, through which she offered clinical assessment services as well as training for fellow professionals. She worked as an assessment consultant for Pearson Clinical Assessment for 22 years, after which she founded Consulting for Attention, Learning, and Memory, LLC. Her clinical interests include learning disorders, psychopharmacology, and the integration of scientific findings into public policy. This webinar is being presented in broadcast audio. Please turn up your computer speakers as there are no dial-in options. We are also presenting with closed captioning. The webinar handout will be posted in the chat box in a few minutes. Please download the document during the live presentation. There is also a Q&A box in Zoom. Please type your questions, concerns, or comments into the Zoom Q&A. Questions in the chat box will not be monitored, so please leverage the Q&A. We will answer questions live at the end, time permitting. If your question is not answered during the live presentation or you wish to speak with a representative, please fill out the follow-up form in a link that will pop up after the webinar. Webinar certificates of attendance will be automatically emailed to you within a few days. As noted in the registration, you must participate the entire 30 minutes to be eligible for the certificate. With all of that being said, I will turn it over to Gail.
Thank you, Erin. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're logging in from. My name is Gail Roden, and today I'll be covering some of the most important clinical, psychometric, and structural changes to the new WAIS-5. As I'm sure you all know, the WAIS-5 is an individually administered test of cognitive ability for adults and adolescents ages 16 and above. It's the leading adult intellectual ability measure in the world and now has 20 subtests measuring 5 cognitive domains, as well as producing a measure of global intelligence, the full-scale IQ. Here's an overview of what we'll be covering today. So let's get started. I did not put Q&A at the bottom because we never quite know how long it's going to take to go through this, but I hope we'll have at least 5 minutes at the end when we can handle a few questions. We'll look first at the revision goals in moving from the WAIS-4 to the WAIS-5. Here were the major goals. We wanted to update the theoretical foundations of the test. This includes things like reviewing the latest neurodevelopmental and neurocognitive research and looking carefully at recent models of working memory. Increasing developmental appropriateness includes improving the phrasing of both instructions and items, making some changes to scoring criteria, and improving the test's accessibility, especially for older adults who may have compromised or declining fine motor and/or expressive language abilities. Increasing user-friendliness means making the test easier to navigate for both examiners and clients. It includes things like improving administration and scoring directions and reducing testing time. We've improved the test's psychometric properties by updating its norms as well as our norming method, and by providing evidence of strong reliability and validity, improving ceilings and floors, and working hard to minimize item bias. Increased clinical utility means making the test more useful for different types of clients and different referral questions. Examples include changing the test structure to a 5-factor model, developing new ancillary index scores, linking to adult measures of achievement, and providing new special group studies. Finally, we've significantly reduced testing time. On average, it should now take you about 45 minutes to obtain a full-scale IQ and about 60 minutes to obtain all 5 primary index scores. Another feature that will help reduce the time to test some clients is different, that is, later start points for examinees you suspect may be intellectually gifted. These will allow you to administer 30 fewer items across the 7 subtests used to calculate the full-scale IQ, while following the reverse rules appropriate to each subtest. Because the age ranges of the WAIS-5 and WAIS-5 overlap for examinees age 16, I'm often asked which test practitioners should use with this age group. For examinees suspected of below average cognitive ability, the WAIS-5 is generally the better choice because of its lower floor for this age range. It's also often the better test with referral questions like whether a client has a specific learning disability because of its additional composite scores and links to achievement tests. By contrast, examinees of high cognitive ability are generally better served by the WAIS-5 due to its higher ceiling for this age group. For the examinee of average ability, the choice between the WAIS-5 and the WAIS-5 requires clinical judgment from the educational or psychological professional who will be administering the test. Now, both the WAIS-5 and WAIS-5 provide a nonverbal index that requires no expressive responses, which may be useful for examinees who are English language learners or who have expressive language difficulties. But for examinees who are primarily Spanish-speaking, with limited English proficiency and limited exposure to American culture, the WAIS-5 Spanish is the best choice to reduce the confounding effects of language on composite scores. Let's turn now to some of the changes in subtests. First of all, 2 subtests on the WAIS-4 have been dropped: picture completion and cancellation. In addition to psychometric issues, picture completion was the least used of the subtests on WAIS-4, which made it a good candidate for removal. And there were a number of reasons why cancellation was removed, including its very low G loading and its relatively low correlation with the other processing speed tasks. And importantly, removing cancellation opened up a slot to add a motor-free processing speed measure. Here are the new subtests you'll find in WAIS-5. Notice that they improve coverage of fluid reasoning, working memory, and processing speed, while 2 of them are shared with the WIMS-5 and allow examiners to obtain a visual working memory composite score from WAIS-5. This slide is really a tease, as I'm not going to say anything more today about these new subtests, since we'll be devoting a complete webinar next Wednesday at this same time that will cover their administration and scoring in detail. Now let's move on to changes in test structure, which are an important feature of the new revision. Instead of the 4-factor model in WAIS-4, the WAIS-5 has 5 primary index scales, like the WAIS-5. What was the perceptual reasoning scale has been divided into 2 scales, visual spatial and fluid reasoning, again, just as on the WAIS-5. For those of you who haven't used the WAIS-5, it may take a little time to get used to this new 5-factor model and understand the differences between the 2 new primary index scales. I find this slide helpful in differentiating between them. The visual spatial index is assessing the skills needed to be a good architect. That is, the ability to take in visual information and use it to build a geometric design that matches a model. Subtests on this index scale are block design and visual puzzles. In contrast, to do well on the fluid reasoning index, a client needs the skills of a detective. That is, the ability to use visual information to identify a common theme or concept, and then apply that concept to solve a problem or select the appropriate response option. This slide shows you how the WAIS-5 subtests retained from WAIS-4 align with the 5 primary index scales. Notice that digit span has been divided into 3 separate subtests on WAIS-5. One of these new subtests, digits forward, must be administered prior to digit sequencing, but does not contribute to either the full-scale IQ score or the working memory index scale. The other change in allocation is that the arithmetic subtest has been moved from the working memory index to the fluid reasoning index, as it better represents this type of ability. So here again is the factor structure of WAIS-5, which aligns with the clinical, theoretical, and psychometric information collected in designing the test. The subtests you see here in blue are those you need to administer to obtain a full-scale IQ score, along with digits forward, as I mentioned, for which the score will not contribute to the full-scale IQ. The subtests in italics are those available should you need to make a substitution. But note the rule at the bottom of the slide. You may make only one substitution when deriving the full-scale score, and that substituted subtest must come from the same domain as the subtest for which it's substituting. Excuse me. It's allergy season here. This slide shows you the subtests that you must administer in order to calculate the 5 primary index scores. Those subtests are printed in blue, and there are 10 of them. This slide, showing ancillary index scales, has a lot of information packed into it. So I'm going to break it down and go over it in subsequent slides. What I want to stress in this slide is the fact that the non-motor index scale is also ideal for remote or telehealth administration, since its component subtests require no motor output. Now let's look at that busy slide, a piece at a time. Along the top row, you see one type of ancillary index scale. There's an expanded index scale for each of the 5 domains, and this slide shows you the subtests that make up each one. Here's a second type of ancillary index score. Each of these is domain-specific. Note that we have scores for verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and motor-reduced processing speed, which is not to be confused with the non-motor ancillary scale. In the working memory column, you'll see 3 new domain-specific scores. One measures visual working memory. The other 2 look at auditory working memory. One specifically at the ability to register and briefly retain auditory information. The other to evaluate manipulation of auditory information after it's been registered. Finally, there are 4 ancillary index scores that serve to summarize performance across multiple domains. Most of you are probably familiar with the GAI, or General Ability Index, which assesses what I like to call the horsepower of an examinee's cognitive ability, without including any subtests that measure working memory or processing speed. The GAI is often important to look at for examiners with ADHD, a specific learning disability, and other conditions that may make processing slower or more subject to simple errors attributable to working memory deficits. It's also the appropriate score to compare to other components of cognitive functioning, such as memory. Its partner is the Cognitive Proficiency Index, which looks at how efficiently the examinee processes relatively simple tasks, those from the working memory and processing speed domains. The other two summary index scores are the Nonverbal Index for those with limited English exposure or expressive language disorders, and the Non-Motor Index, helpful when testing individuals with motor impairment, as well as for remote test administration. This slide again shows you the subtests that contribute to each of these summary index scores. And again, a reminder that that non-motor index can be used easily for remote assessment. Finally, this slide shows all the ancillary index scales and the subtests that contribute to each of them. The important point of this slide is near the top in red. It tells us that subtest substitution is not permitted for any of these ancillary indexes, with the exception of the non-motor index. More information is available in the WAIS-5 Administration and Scoring Manual. Let's turn next to a brief look at the administration and scoring options for the WAIS-5. For administration, you can use the traditional paper kit or use Q Interactive to administer digitally using 2 iPads. In addition, there are scoring options. If you administered using the traditional paper kit, you can either score by hand or opt for digital scoring using Pearson's online Q Global system. If you're administering using Q Interactive, digital scoring is included in the QI system. Digital scoring, whether from Q Global or Q Interactive, is a great time saver and provides quality control because we don't have to do all those table lookups, which are prone to error. Both Q options provide identical reports for the WAIS-5. I'd like to say just a few words about the WAIS-5 normative sample. As you can see, there were over 2,000 individuals in the sample, which was stratified by sex, education level, ethnicity, and region of the country. Did you know that we had almost half of the sample collected when COVID-19 hit in March 2020 and we had to pause data collection? We hoped that we'd be able to continue with examiners and examinees wearing PPE, personal protective equipment. But a pilot study showed that the scores collected with PPE were not equivalent to those we had collected previously. So we opted to discard the pre-2020 data and start over in January 2023 without the use of PPE. On, let's talk a little bit about the psychometric properties, reliability, and validity of the WAIS-5. Looking first at reliability, for composite scores, we want to see values of 0.90 or higher, and that's exactly what we see for the reliability coefficients for the full-scale IQ and primary index scores. For the ancillary scores, all had reliability coefficients in the excellent range, with the exception of the motor reduced processing speed index, which was in the good range. Looking at internal consistency, you'll see it was 0.98 for the full-scale IQ, and all the index scores scored 0.90 or above. Test-retest stability was calculated for both the full-scale IQ, and that was 0.93, and for all index and subtest scores. We expect these to show more variability, which they did, ranging from 0.71 to 0.93. An interscorer agreement was evaluated in a special study for the verbal comprehension subtests, producing high scores of 0.90 or above. Turning to validity, we evaluated construct validity in a number of ways, all of which produced strong results. And as you can see here, we found moderate to high correlations with other measures of cognitive ability and related concepts such as academic achievement and memory. Finally, before we wrap up, let's take a look at the special group studies that were done. The special group studies are important to look at as the WAIS-5 is one of Pearson's most widely used products and is administered by a wide variety of psychologists for many different purposes. Also, it's often a critical part of a battery of tests used to assess a person being considered for a particular diagnosis or status. For example, it's frequently used to assess for neurocognitive conditions such as intellectual disability, dementia, or specific learning disorders, or to establish if an individual is intellectually gifted. The WAIS-5 can also be used in other types of evaluations to understand strengths and treatment needs, such as those for individuals with ADHD, those on the autism spectrum, and those with traumatic brain injury or stroke. So let's sum up some of the most important features and changes that characterize the WAIS-5. What's great about it? Well, it incorporates the 5-factor model. It allows us to comprehensively evaluate working memory. It's co-normed with the WIMS-5, which will publish over the summer or in the next few months. It's available in both paper and digital formats for both administration and scoring. And very importantly, it offers faster administration time than its predecessor. What's new in WAIS-5? It has new subtests, which I'll describe in detail at next Wednesday's webinar. 3 are available only on the WAIS-5, while 2 more are shared with the WIMS-5. We have later start points for individuals suspected to be intellectually gifted, another time saver. It has a host of new indices, including expanded indices for all 5 primary domains and new index scores for clients with expressive language or motor problems, with the latter also ideal for remote administration. And finally, what's better about this new revision? First, we've reduced the administration time for both the full-scale IQ and 10 primary subtests. We've expanded construct coverage for working memory, fluid reasoning, and processing speed. Administration and scoring directions have been simplified, and we've focused on developmental appropriateness, especially for older examinees. Of course, the norms have been updated, and we've added a number of ancillary index scores that allow examiners a great deal of flexibility in administration and interpretation, as well as improved clinical utility. I'd like to finish up by sharing with you the types of training that Pearson makes available for the WAIS-5. This slide shows the 3 types of offerings we have. Per-seat sessions, where you as an individual or a small group can sign up. These are a half day. Those scheduled for a private group of up to 40 clinicians with your choice of date, time, and modality, either web-based or in person. And custom trainings that we put together to meet special learning needs. And here are the half-day and full-day trainings available today. A much more detailed overview of WAIS-5, a half-day, WAIS-5 on Q Interactive, also a half-day, a full day on administration, scoring, and basic interpretation, and finally, a half-day session on interpretation and intervention decision-making. Here are the next half-hour webinars that I'll be hosting on the next 2 Wednesdays, so I hope you'll mark your calendars and sign up. One will introduce you to the new WAIS-5 subtests in detail, and the other will be an overview of using the WAIS-5 and WIMS-5 together to assess both cognition and memory. We have just a few minutes left to address a couple of the many questions that I think have come in. And if I don't get to your question now, as Erin told you up top, you'll have an opportunity to ask to get in touch with your assessment consultant with the questionnaire that comes up after this webinar is completed. And I've also put here a URL where you can go to find the assessment consultant for your state and your type of practice, and you can contact them for the information you need. So do we have a couple questions we can sneak in?
Yes, thank you so much, Gail. One question had come in about the recording of this webinar. So yes, we will be posting the recording of this webinar out to our website, and so check in for that in a few days. We usually get those posted pretty quickly. I thought I'd go ahead and answer that one. One question that came in, are we still allowed to administer this test on paper, or are only the digital options available?
Oh no, absolutely. You can purchase a typical, traditional paper and pencil kit. You can administer it using paper and pencil. You can score it by hand if you like. But as I mentioned, using digital scoring, which would be Q Global for the paper kit, is a great way to improve quality control because it skips all of those table lookups, and also it's a big time saver. But yes, absolutely. You can do digital or you can do paper administration.
Great, thank you so much. There also was a question on how long customers should be allowed to take to move to the new version. So what is the recommendation typically to adopt the new version of a test?
Oh, that's always a question. And I hate to not give you a hard and fast answer, but I and a couple of colleagues researched this a few years ago, and we actually wrote a paper on it. And it turns out there's no absolute rule from APA or your state psychology boards. Sometimes school districts do have a time frame, and typically that's 1 year. Other places I've seen 1 to 2 years, but I would recommend you get on board now. This test has been around for a while. We want to be sure that Flynn effects are not interfering with getting accurate scores. So I would recommend that you switch to this test within the year from the time it was published, which was, tell me again, last
August. Yep.
Oh my gosh! So we're coming up on
us. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. There was a couple of questions about training, so we definitely recommend the per-seat training or looking into those training options. That will give you a really good idea of all the different pieces that are included in WAIS-5. So check out our options for training or reach out to your assessment representative to talk through options that might work best for you. With that being said, Gail, thank you so much for being here. We're looking forward to your webinar next week to dive into the new subtests more. And thank you everybody for joining us to participate today. Thanks so much and have a great day.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Thanks.